This is Keys to the Shop, episode 417, Dialing in Your Coffee's Water with Taylor Miner of Third Wave Water. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. I'm really excited to have you along today, and I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to Keys to the Shop. That's really easy to do. All you need to do is hit subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast right now, and you'll always be updated with new content as it comes out, and it does come out rather frequently throughout the month, just keeping things interesting and fresh and keep the great content coming to you. So subscribe to the show. That would be awesome. And don't forget to share these episodes with your team, with your friends, coworkers, etc., and let people know about Keys to the Shop as a resource. A lot of people just, really busy running coffee shops, and it's hard to know what kind of resources are out there, but this is a really unique collection of wisdom and insights across the global coffee industry, all in one podcast, over 700 published episodes, and a lot to choose from. So for those who don't know about Keys to the Shop, let them know and give them the gift of perspective and insights and best practices. Thanks everyone so much for doing that. Now, on top of doing this podcast, I also offer consulting and coaching. I've been able to work with so many of you who have been listeners to the show and others in the industry to help you run an amazing coffee bar, to help you elevate your operations, your people, your quality. Really, the whole point here is to allow you to experience maximal joy in the process of running a coffee shop by avoiding needless mistakes, building great foundations for the future, scaling responsibly, solving tough issues, and taking full advantage of opportunities that come your way as your business grows. And so one-on-one coaching might be a great fit for you. I would love to have a conversation and see what's going on with your business and how I might be able to help you through Keys to the Shop consulting. All you have to do is reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. We'll have a free discovery call and talk all about it. You can also feel free to reach out on Instagram. Just send me a direct message at Keys to the Shop. So look forward to talking with you, and hope I can help you in your coffee shop journey through Keys to the Shop consulting. Now, one of the first things that we do when we are training is we taste coffee. We have to learn how to taste coffee. It lets us know what we are shooting for. Customers also have in their minds what the standard is that they're looking for when they judge the best coffee shop. And you definitely want your coffee shop to be a standout in their mind. And one of the ways to do that is to use equipment that maximizes the flavor of your coffee. Equipment like the Ground Control Cyclops brewer from the folks at Voga Coffee. Now, the Ground Control brewer is an amazing piece of technology. The SCA award-winning tech is allowing you, the user, to access an incredible depth and range of flavors in your coffee so your customers get the absolute best from what you are presenting in the cup. And it's not only an amazing batch brewer, but it also makes tea, batched iced lattes, batched cold brew. If you want more opportunity for profitability, efficiency, and higher quality, check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. One thing that I know is customers pay attention to the details. Details, especially when it comes to the texture of a drink. You've got the temperature, you've got the flavor, and you've also got the aroma, and then there's the texture of the drink. And all of this is helped by, the quality coffee you use, but then also the quality of milk or the plant-based beverages that you choose to stock on your bar and that your baristas use. Now, the leader in the industry in this respect is the Barista series from Pacific. This is the line of plant-based performance beverages that are designed for baristas and preferred by baristas worldwide because of that flavor balance, that texture, great for latte art. It really is a performance beverage, keeping in mind the end user, the barista, and your customer. Check them out at pacificfoodservice.com. Get samples and try it for yourself. I do think you're going to be really impressed, and so will your customers. And if you're thinking about, what is the best and how can I serve the best plant-based beverage in my shop, I think the answer there is to use the Barista series from Pacific. All right, everyone. Well, today we have got a great show. We get to sit down with a co founder of Third Wave Water, Taylor Miner. From starting a cafe and a coffee roastery in 2008 to pitching Third Wave Water on the TV show Shark Tank in 2017, Taylor has been passionate about making great coffee more accessible. He has a love for people, coffee, and technology, and that has given him many unique opportunities over the years. Of course, being a business owner in his past with a roastery and a cafe has given him unique insight into what it takes to brew great coffee. And in 2016, along with his business partner and co founder, Charles, they founded Third Wave Water. And Third Wave Water was created to give people an accessible way to create the best water for coffee that they could get their hands on for brewing at home or even in a commercial setting. And since 2016, the company has taken off and been a real big part of the coffee industry. They have many different mixes of minerals that they use for different types of coffee now. And in this conversation with Taylor, we get to hear the story about Third Wave Water, but we're also going to talk about those minerals. We're going to talk about the importance of water in the coffee brewing process, and then how these different blends were developed and why. Why have these different developed blends for different types of coffee, both brewing types and roast levels? And we talk about different processing methods and just the overview of how we view the inputs that give us the outcome of great coffee from a water perspective. And Taylor comes with a great amount of insights into this subject, of course. And so I'm really excited to share this with you, and let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the co-founder of Third Wave Water, Taylor Miner. Well, Taylor, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I have a drawer filled with Third Wave Water in my house. Occasionally, I remember to get the jug from the store and it's just like, I need to do that more often, but it feels like it's a ubiquitous presence in the industry. And I've so enjoyed seeing the evolution of what you did, helping centralize the discussion on, water quality in coffee in the industry that was, and this continues to be such a hot topic with quality, whether we're commercial or just home users. So thank you for one. And two, I want to know a little bit about your experience in really embracing this as a project and a business. It's not something the average person just says, we're going to ship the ingredients to make great water for coffee. So what did that look like?
Absolutely. It's one, if you were to tell me I would be doing this 10 years ago, I thought you were crazy. But I've been in specialty coffee for a while. It's actually started in the late 90s. My parents owned a coffee shop. I was in junior high and I loathed it. I hated working there. I said I would never do this. Fast forward to 2008 and I opened up a shop, a cafe roastery here in Cedarville. And 2008 was a lot different in coffee. There wasn't a lot of online community teaching you how to roast coffee, how to make coffee for a cafe. If there was making coffee in a cafe, it was completely different. We kind of just bootstrapped and used the information knowledge we had from having a cafe in the late 90s. I think whenever you have something like this, you always say, oh, the next time I'm going to do something like this, or you kind of always have those kind of thoughts and ideas going in the back of your head. So yeah, I'd gotten to home roasting and then opened that cafe and ran that for a few years. It just ended up selling it in 2018. So I had 10 years of running a cafe roastery, which I think in coffee shop years is kind of like dog years. It's a long time.
That's like a life.
Yeah, it is. So I had learned most early on about coffee going to coffee fests. So went to all the classes there, a lot of that kind of cafe centric training, from ice machine, ice density to, how to make a, espresso blend, how to, make a profitable, drink bar. There are two different things. Making good coffee and making a good coffee business are not two in the same, especially depending on where you are and what your customers are looking for. Yeah, so I started getting deeper and deeper into specialty coffee in 2014. Went to my first SCA, I think, and I went to they called it the symposium back then, Rico now. And I think at that first one is where it was at that one or the one after when they did back to back years in Seattle. I heard Maxwell and Dashwood and Chris Hendon give their talk on water for coffee, and we tasted then the first kind of their first iteration of, hey, this is the same coffee made with the same TDS water but different stuff inside of it. Look how much different it tastes. So I had that brewing in the back of my head. Came back, I was adding a cold brew nitro to the cafe. I was adding a pour over bar. And one of the things I tackled was this elaborate water filtration system. So here in Ohio, we have really bad water. We have, we live right next to a limestone mine. So the water is about 450 TDS coming out of the tap. So it's
Wow.
especially hard. So I think that's another reason why we kind of invented third wave water here. We had more to gain at the get-go. I had made this kind of bespoke handmade filtration system that included like partially softening water, using a RO and then blending back in minerals, and then pumping everything to some big pressure tanks so I could have my hose to fill up my 50-gallon, how's that? No, my 20-gallon cold brew kind of tank. So you got some good water pressure coming off of that. So I had all that. I had this, I upgraded my roaster. I had an old 15-kilo Ambex, took it apart, put all new burners in it, ran artisan roaster scope. So I was trying to make, third wave, artisan coffee. Had a lot of dark roast drinkers, but we're trying to push some really good light roasts. And my business partner now, Charles, owned a coffee subscription company. So he had come into the shop, and basically we were one of the roasters in his subscription company. That had been going for about a year. And then I was helping put in a nitro cold brew station office co-share in Dayton. Charles and I were setting that up and we said, hey, let's go get lunch. And at lunch, he made the comment, I wish I could ship your water to my customers. And I said, well, we could ship them dehydrated water as a joke. And then I'm like, well, actually, we might be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that conversation was the catalyst for Third Wave. So I came back. I've always been a little bit extra with tech and tools. So I had a bunch of stuff, centrifuges and particle sieve shakers, and I had ordered a bunch of minerals off Amazon. Mixed them all up in a big Ziploc bag. Weighed them out, put them inside of these little micro centrifuge vials, and then dropped them off at the office co-share and said, hey, these are for Charles. They're not drugs.
Right.
Yeah. And so that next week he was traveling, and one of his things has always been, hey, when I travel, the coffee doesn't taste the same. Why? And he had ended up having a great coffee experience on the road. It's like, hey, this is actually like something we should try to do something. So this was in July of 2016. So, hey, let's do a limited release to your subscription customers. We called it Coffee Spice back then. It was kind of like a Dune reference. I didn't know what to call it.
Oh man.
And then that went well. People liked it. We're like, okay, let's launch it at a coffee event. So we went to a Barista Guild event in Chicago. This was at the end of October of 2016. At that time, we were incredibly unprofitable. We mixed all the minerals by hand. We weighed everything out by hand. And it took us, we were talking the other day, it took us like 8 to 10 hours to make basically 100 samples. It was incredibly time consuming and not really profitable, but the whole goal was to see, hey, let's see if anybody likes it. So we did that. We got some really good reception there. And then I remember the next week, our second customer ever was Socratic Coffee on Instagram. And then our sixth customer was Department of Brewology. And I'm like, oh, these are some heavy hitters in coffee. And then we ended up doing a kind of a collab with Department of Brewology. We launched a Kickstarter in January. So we went from launching in October to, hey, let's do a Kickstarter. We kind of gave ourselves 2 months and launched in January. That funded in like 11 hours. And then that next month, we got a call from Shark Tank. And they said they saw us online and thought we'd be great for the show and we should apply. So we started that application. Fast forward in June then of 2017, we filmed Shark Tank in LA. And then it ended up airing the beginning of October. So we went from launching to airing on Shark Tank in under a year, which is never a good business plan if that's your business plan. So it was very serendipitous, and we couldn't duplicate it again if we tried.
Well, I mean, I imagine you couldn't really be prepared for all of this just snowball of business that you were talking about, like blending by hand and everything else. And now you've got to iterate and satisfy the need in the market.
Yeah.
And what is the response that people had to the product? I mean, this is obviously popular enough because it's changing the way people are doing things and experiencing coffee. So how is that feedback? What was happening with your communication?
So I think we were getting this common element where almost the most specialty coffee nowadays is being made at home and not at cafes, just because it's, really the amount of time and effort into making a pour over the way some people like it. It just really isn't tenable in a cafe. So most home drinkers now are, 10x the specialty they were 10 years ago. So they get, spend a lot of money on a good grinder. There's no shortage of good, expensive grinders. You spend a lot of money on a coffee maker, a kettle, get all this equipment. And you had this, I think we've all had that experience where we drank a cup of coffee somewhere and it was like transcendent. And then we buy the bag and we take it home and it's not, it's like, did I get the wrong bag? Like, this has to be like, what's going on? And a lot of times that's because of the water. So it's a kind of a big sell because it's something, it doesn't necessarily off the bat it's not intuitive. So, hey, my water tastes fine. So then if the water tastes fine, it should make the coffee taste fine. So it's something that cafes had always dealt with. And there are tools out there to kind of make your cafe water ideal for not only coffee brewing, but your equipment. But none of those things scaled down to home use. And so it'd be like recommending your Macala EK to a home coffee brewer. That's not really the tool designed for them. Or for most. I'm sure there are some people that use EKs at home, but we had that kind of initial, hey, people really dug it. I think what we were most surprised for, or pleasantly surprised, is how many regular people liked it. If that's, we have a lot of people that use Keurigs or just, simple coffee or average coffee, and it also makes their coffee taste better. It's not just specialty people. There are also a lot of people that have expensive equipment, and they're worried about, hey, the water can ruin it. You spend a couple $1,000 on an espresso machine, and they say, hey, the water needs to be like this, and it's like, well, how do I get there? And like, well, you just need to buy a couple $100 and test equipment. You need to test it constantly, and then you need to apply these filtration techniques, and it can be overwhelming. So the ability to just start at zero and add minerals is really ideal for them.
Yeah, and that's a big conversation in coffee that I think has been going on progressively and getting bigger and bigger as time has gone on. Early third wave was a lot of, and I say third wave as the movement itself, as well as your own product, it's about how we as a community are experiencing coffee and helping each other evolve our understanding, but then translating that to what people buy from our roasteries. And the roasteries that are proliferated as people start to open businesses allows more opportunity across the states and the world to experience high quality coffee. I was just telling somebody the other day, I could throw a dart and a map right now, probably hit specialty coffee in some place, at least here in the States. And that means that the average regular person, as you put it, is going to have access to those beans. But then there's that other part that could be a little bit too complex for them. And so to say like, it's just inconvenient. Now it's accessible to have all this specialty coffee available to me, but we want to make it more accessible to have predictably good experiences with coffee. And that seems like the home revolution of coffee could either be seen as a threat or a benefit for specialty coffee, because we want people to come into our stores, but then make coffee at home. As a lot of us are in the coffee business and coffee shops, how do we approach something like this? It's just, maybe we're not even a roaster, but is the product something like making water better at home for coffee ultimately just a net gain for us in our little neck of the woods?
Yeah, I think it can be. You can have kind of open-minded growth mentality to, hey, more people are making good coffee at home. They don't need me. I think there's a huge opportunity for, hospitality, and especially excellent hospitality, customer service. We found that just giving what we thought was base level customer service wows people because of the really low quality of the average experience. But I think we've all had the experience of being somewhere, traveling somewhere, and having a dish, you're in Europe and have a pastry, you have that experience, and it's not just the food, it's the ambiance, it's the kind of the whole stage that's set. It's not just the consumption of the thing. So the cafes, I think, that are thriving are the ones that are building out that experience that you can't really get at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And so my question is, you started with a basic mixture of minerals that you would send out. Now you started to iterate different kinds of, for this, for that, it's ideal for certain types of coffees. How does that break down, and how has that evolved for you over the years? Because it is, as we have more coffees represented in the market, we have more of a desire to maximize our enjoyment of different processing types, different origins, different brewing methods. How do you break that down when it comes to quality of water from your end?
When we first launched Third Wave, the on the box, we didn't say coffee anywhere on the front. And we realized that after a few years, like, hey, somebody's looking at this and they have no idea what it is. They'll have no idea what it is for a very long time. So even from the get-go, we've had, how do we educate, how do you educate the average person that water matters for your coffee? How do you educate them? Hey, this is how you add it to something. I think having a cafe before really helped with the mentality of, instead of trying to bend the will of the consumers to my preconceived notion of specialty coffee, the goal is how can we make their experiences better within the paradigm that they think is specialty coffee. So if they like dark roast, if they like, a baked, Brazilian that tastes like coffee, and that's it. If they like cream in their coffee, if they like sweet stuff, how do you make something that elevates their experience? And they may not be drinking a, single origin, light roasted 90 plus coffee, but we can improve that. So with that in mind, we started from the packaging, like how do we talk about this to the average person, but kind of in this weird water coffee space, regional preferences of coffee. I have this hypothesis that a lot of regional coffee preferences have more to do with regional water differences. So for instance, on the coasts, you find people like lighter roast coffees, but you also find that they have surface water or low TDS water. And then in the kind of flyover states, you have a lot more dark roasted coffee, but also there's a much more prevalence of high TDS, high alkalinity water. And basically, dark roast coffees taste better with high alkalinity waters. Light roast coffees taste better with low alkalinity, low TDS waters. So because of that, that's kind of what's shaped, in my opinion, had an effect on those regional coffee preferences. So with that in mind, we kind of said, okay, how can we make a dark roast coffee profile that protects your equipment, that is kind of going to duplicate that experience that someone is looking for. So if they're drinking dark roast, they're not looking for fruit flavors. And in a sense, some of that acidity can present itself as like an acrid taste and a burnt taste, but you're looking more for the nuts, the chocolates, more of those savory flavors. And so that's where we started making basically higher, even outside of the SCA spec. So our dark roast profile is almost 200 TDS and has a lot of alkalinity in it. And that is because, hey, we thought dark roast actually tastes better this way. And so it's a way to protect your equipment so you're not going to scale it. It's a way if you're a roaster and you're cupping on different sides of the earth, like, hey, this is the coffee and this is what it's going to taste like. So it's a tool to have, a common language. On that note, we even have some even wilder coffees, water profiles, our cold brew. And again, this is from the idea that most people, most home consumers who are drinking cold brew, one of the big selling points is low acid. So they're looking, low acid coffees. Cold brews tend to be lower acidity, and our cold brew profile actually pegs that. It is about double the alkalinity of the dark roast coffee, but the difference between classic and cold brew is about a 3 times less acidic when it comes to a pH than our classic light roast profile. So it's definitely way outside of what SCA standards. But if someone's at home, they're like, hey, I want a cold brew coffee. I want it to be low acid. That's the product we made for them.
It's great to have that large range. And did that range, you used this obviously as an opportunity to get feedback from people, but you did your own testing as well. Did some of this come from feedback that people gave you about, okay, this profile needs to be adjusted because of this range of coffees that we're trying to brew this on?
Yes, absolutely. So what we found is we said, hey, this classic profile, our first one, this will make your coffee taste better. Well, what we found was it didn't make everybody's coffee taste better. There were some people who didn't like it, and there's nothing wrong with them. And so we started thinking, okay, what are their assumptions? If they are saying, this is what I think better tasting is, how do we get there? So like on our website, we have a little form. We need to do a better job on it, but it's like, hey, what kind of coffee do you drink? A future iteration will be like, hey, what kind of flavors are you looking for? Like, click on these. You have fruits, you have nuts, you have chocolates, you have caramels, and based off of that kind of flavor wheel click experience, we'll kind of recommend a water that will help kind of gently shift those flavor profiles. So definitely it was, hey, what are our customers want? What, as we go kind of more and more mainstream, when we say better is extremely subjective. So the more we can align ourselves with, those base assumptions of our customers, the better.
Okay, awesome. So talk to me a little bit about the kind of like the Venn diagram between like a darker coffee and an espresso. So if you have the choice between, like personally, I like a more developed profile for espresso. That's just the old school Chris, and I probably won't change my opinion. So
I took the class from Dr. Dr. John. Yeah. His espresso blending where you're adding a little bit of a high quality Robusta into basically a dark roasted Central American, 2 beans, 3 beans maximum. But I think that would be considered more of a classic Italian style, but it pairs really well with milk. So, and that's kind of, a lot of people now that drink just straight shots of espresso. And I would say a dark roasted coffee just pairs really well with milk. And, if you're making a macchiato or a latte cappuccino, it's hard to beat, right? So, but yeah, that kind of difference in dark roast, I would say, I mean, with espresso, you're looking at maximizing all the flavors, right? So what used to be like Sumatra, it's kind of coming back into favor, but Sumatra used to be, the dark roast coffee, right? It had that wet leather boot taste that, yeah, that's those notes that you're looking for. It really had a nice funk to it all of its own. And so it tasted really good dripped, but if you were to concentrate it and make that into espresso, I think those flavors were overwhelming. Same with Kenya. Kenya AA, right? Used to be another one of those, what was considered specialty at the time. And you normally wouldn't put Kenya in a espresso profile. Now, people do nowadays, but you're definitely going to get this acid bomb that is not pleasant. So, and then I think those flavors of Central Americans with that kind of nutty, chocolatey flavor, those they balance well on the palate. You add a little bit of Robusta in there for that crema stabilization, that little extra fat. And there's this high quality Robustas now, but you just get a good shot of espresso.
Sure. Well, I mean, the question is, since there's a dark roast option for packets and then there's an espresso option, but espresso can be light or dark, is it preferable just to say, well, this is the classic Italian, and so I'm just going to get the dark profile, or is it more about optimizing the water for the method than it is the roast?
So, yeah, and that's the thing. We didn't want, when you're talking about espresso machines, you don't want to sub-optimize just for flavor. So espresso machines get a lot hotter than a regular coffee maker and have a kind of a different chemistry going on. So the espresso machine profile is specifically for the machine first, coffee second. So you could use the dark roast in the espresso machine. It would also protect your equipment and it would give you a little more alkalinity. But yeah, the espresso machine is a little bit different. So we'll go back when we first started with the classic profile, it had some sodium chloride in there and there's not a lot of alkalinity. And we got some pushback from, industry insiders saying, hey, we need more alkalinity. This is going to destroy, our equipment. So it's like, okay, well, let's figure this out. So the espresso machine profile was the attempt to, how do we balance the needs of the espresso machine techs, manufacturers, with the flavor of the coffee. That was kind of that iteration was. And with that, it was like, how do we make it as juicy or bright as possible? And that was the espresso machine.
Okay, so if I use, like at home, I use a flare. So I'm not really as concerned about the innards of it, and longevity of my espresso machine. So I very well could use the dark and not worry about it.
Absolutely. You could even use a dark roast inside of the espresso machine. So the dark roast would be compliant, would be kosher for that. There's something called the Langmuir saturation, and that's the likelihood of something corroding or scaling. And two of the factors are alkalinity and temperature. So as the temperature goes up, the acidity or the corrosive effects of water are heightened. And so in most modern boilers, you're getting up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, 350 some, a lot of bars of pressure. You have a thin stream of water kind of being shot, pretty quick with some tight 90-degree angles. And so under those scenarios is where you could potentially get corrosion. In the end, most manufacturers would prefer to have scale over corrosion, because corrosion can cause a kind of a catastrophic failure of the metals in the boilers.
What do you think about processing methods and selection and customization of water for the processing method itself? So if we're talking about solubility, there's different levels of impact that processing can have on a coffee's solubility so like I remember way back in the early 2000s, I remember Billy Wilson was talking at a competition about how this is a natural and therefore he's going to get it at a lower temperature because it gives itself up to the water quicker. And I was like, that's the first I ever heard of that. So since then, obviously, we have a greater understanding of how these things are impacting. There's just a whole wild west of processing now. How do we navigate that when it comes to water quality?
That's interesting. So there's some other weird effects that water have on the mechanics of brewing. So if you were to brew the same coffee, one with distilled water and then one with our minerals added to it, the one with our minerals would, if you're doing a V60, would brew about 45 seconds faster, or the drawdown would happen about 45 seconds faster.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're adding minerals, it's actually speeding up how fast it brews. So with that, if you had two of the same waters, some of the taste difference may be down to contact time and not depending on the brew method, and not necessarily the mineral makeup. So the mineral makeup affected it, but secondarily. On the other hand, if you have a higher TDS water, but it's from softened with salt, that will actually increase the brewing time by up to 50%. So if you ever, cafes out there, you ever have where the basket overflows and, you have to use one of those 1.5 gallon baskets just for a regular, pot. Most likely those places have salt softeners. And so that affects that.
Oh.
So then when it comes to process, you're kind of weighing, okay, what are obviously if you're doing like full immersion, those brewing parameters aren't really affected, but most people are doing pour overs or a pot. So you're trying to then balance, okay, what's affecting the drawdown time? Do I need to increase, or decrease the grind size? So there's a little difference there. On the other end, we're working with Brian Bikey. We were talking about him earlier. We were doing one of his competition coffees. This was in like 2017, and it was a geisha. And what we found was the geisha tasted better, tasted more fruity, more sweet with a higher alkalinity water. And so some of my hypothesis was that, hey, the geisha actually tastes better with water that would normally make other coffees taste poorly.
Mm.
And so you needed to, and because they were, extra sweet and extra light, you almost needed to doctor it the other way to give it a little body so it wasn't so thin. And so in terms of processing, there's now all of these different, fermentation type processing, not to mention wet, honey. I haven't really gotten into that yet in terms of really looking like, hey, this process, this style works better, is more on like the note side. Okay, if you're trying to pull out these things, or if you're tasting it this way and you're like, man, I just wish it had a little more of this and a little less of this, right? That's kind of where there's some of the fine tuning then with the water that you can take.
So the physics of this is generally, like I hear, this processing method might affect how a coffee can behave similarly to something like if it's a dark roasted coffee and generally you want an alkaline water for that. If there's a geisha, maybe there is something that is physically mimicking what the favorable conditions. Alkaline water is favorable for that because of its physical state. It's interesting because there might be some kind of a spectrum that you could put together, some kind of like, the taster's wheel or like a water wheel
Yeah.
for coffee.
Yes. And that's, I think, these are the interesting conversations you have at trade shows, right? With coffee professionals. Like
right.
most people will be like, what in the world are they talking about? But yes, there is. And again, these are all generalities. And I think with most specialty coffee people, we have to always remind ourselves when we're at an event, like we were just at the Coffee Fest, and it's like 95% of our customers look nothing like the people that are here at this expo today. And so it's, really making sure that we're making products for those people, along with the high end. That's our kind of our legacy. That's where we were. But it's like, hey, just like car companies make high end race car parts, they also make, parts for your everyday, family station wagon or a minivan.
Well, there's a lot of nerdy conversations that create the most mundane things. I want engineers of bridges to be super nerds about those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't have to understand bridges. I need them to. So if they're at a conference talking about, bridge stuff, then, more power to you, as long as it translates to a great trip for me. But I got a question about the bar itself, and maybe it's just get your thoughts on this, because as we're talking about customizing water and getting the most out of our coffee, we generally, when we're at a coffee bar that has a variety of coffees they are presenting to their customers, saying, hey, try our espresso blend, try our decaf, try our drip, try our single origin espresso that's on rotation. That category, it's often where we are disappointed and we can't dial it in and maybe it's because we are using the exact same water that we use for our blend and our decaf for the single origin espresso. And I don't know if there's a solution for that, except to say, maybe we have to roast differently for single origin espresso, or just take the hit in the potential.
With a lot of those coffees, you have to have, the pre-infusion time, might be a minute long, just because the variables are a little bit different. But Yeah, more cafes I think are using smaller equipment, if that makes sense, like smaller grinders. I have seen a lot of cafes use almost, high-end prosumer grinders because they can use three or four of them and you can have different coffees. But I could see specialty cafes moving with more and more espresso machines like a decent where, hey, we might have three or four and then we might put different waters on each one or
Mm.
kind of have different profiles for, hey, we're trying to pull this out with this one, this out with this one, where, even switching water with a machine like that, because you don't have a boiler is a lot easier. It's not really realistic when you have a boiler type espresso machine to swap out waters when it takes, half hour for that thing to warm up. But, I mean, as we keep pushing coffee and getting more and more out of it, you look at espresso machines, coffee makers, grinders. Over the last 10 years, there's been a ton of improvements and innovation and iteration. But in water, there really hasn't been, especially for the cafe side. So I think 10 years ago, water really wasn't an issue. But as we fixed all these other variables and really pushed them, water is starting to become the thing that's lacking and the thing that really shows poorly because everything else is kind of dialed in.
Yeah, great point. And we don't see anything slowing down when it comes to consumers and making coffee at home better and better. Tools such as Third Wave Water and beyond is helping people achieve sometimes better results than you'll get in the shop because the shop is set up for a one size fits all model for all those things. But I could see where the future coffee shop sounds very Conan O'Brien in the year 2000. We're going to have bars that would be, like you say, set up to actually showcase the coffee in such a way that it really is for whole bean sales. And so you can get an actual representation of what is being offered on the shelf. And of course, there's the convenience of going in a place and drinking coffee, of course, but with more of a likelihood of getting a accurate representation of the coffee on the shelf in the shop, you're likely to sell more beans. And the shop is now this, always has been social hub, but it's also better marketing for the coffee itself, which I think a lot of coffee bars just don't do a great job marketing the coffee they have on the shelf because they're just pumping it out so fast and generally. So I don't know.
It is hard. I remember managing, baristas, the average lifespan or average time that somebody is in a shop, the more complicated you make something. And if you don't have systems and tools in place to kind of help, the more bespoke and handmade it is, the harder it is to manage that cafe to have that competency level be high and then be continual. And so it's always a balance. So as we have tools that kind of help us offload some of that specialty, maybe do some of the heavy lifting, this constant kind of evolution of man, machine, and then the environment.
Yeah. Man, machine, and coffee spice, right?
That's right. That's right.
Taylor, great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you here today. And thank you for being here and sharing with us. Where can we learn more about Third Wave Water?
Yeah, so we're at all the socials at thirdwavewater.com. You can find us there. We're on Amazon, all the normal places. If you ever go to a coffee fest or a expo, we're usually there. Well, depending on where it is. So we like to go to fun places and eat lots of fun food. So that's one of the upsides. I'm like, hey, every time we go, it was just like, try not to gain that much weight. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you again, Taylor. Great to talk to you.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. And I hope that it caused you to take a harder look at your water in your coffee shop. All of this is really just a process of curiosity, testing, and especially if you're already dedicated to using a particular kind of filtration system for your coffee on your coffee bar, equipping your customers with the ability to brew great coffee at their home that matches the kind of water that you get the best results from in your cafe is a perfect way to drive sales in your coffee bar. When you're a roaster, you want people to be successful with your coffee. And this is just one thing that will help And this is just one thing that will make a big difference in that quest. So a huge thank you to Taylor for joining us on the show. Appreciate all you and Charles do at Third Wave Water. If you want more information about what they're up to and the different kinds of minerals that they have for coffee, go to their website for all of that over at thirdwavewater.com. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any episode of Keys to the Shop, go ahead and send me an email, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's where you can reach out. And then also, if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting, if you want to work one-on-one for coaching at whatever stage your business happens to be in, let's talk. chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, last time I saw Taylor and Charles of Third Wave Water was at Coffee Fest. Coffee Fest happens 4 times a year. We are halfway through the season here. We have 2 more shows coming up, one in Anaheim, California, the next one in Orlando. And I would love to see you there. I get to present and I get to judge and I just get to meet people. It's really fun. And one of the biggest takeaways at Coffee Fest is the idea that you get to be resourced with amazing information through lectures, trainings, hands-on workshops, panel discussions with industry leaders. And on top of that, you're in a great city for great coffee and you're interacting with this network and this community of like-minded coffee professionals. Not to mention the fact that there's a trade show there. You get to interact with great vendors who will equip you with awesome goods and services for your coffee shop. So go to coffeefest.com to learn more. Get signed up today. Use the code KEYS, K-E-Y-S, for general admission. You get 50% off if you use the code KEYS, K-E-Y-S. I hope to see you there. Again, Anaheim, Orlando. Let's do it. Check them out, coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of today's episode, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share these episodes with your friends, with your family, with your teammates, and share them with that person who checks your receipt over at Walmart. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.